Hi, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar, Behind Successful People Teams, How to Build and Scale the Stellar Culture. I'm Heather Lohman, Senior Content Marketing Manager at TripActions, and I'm just going to quickly cover a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, you can type them into the question box in the GoToWebinar control panel. We'll answer as many as we can get to at the end of the presentation, and of course, you can always follow up with us afterwards by emailing your questions to webinars@tripactions.com. Also, feel free to chime into the conversation on social. And one final note, we are recording the presentation today, so be sure to keep an eye out on your inbox for the on-demand recording. And now, without further ado, let me introduce our presenters, TripActions Chief People Officer Leslie Crow and Namely Chief People Officer Lorna Hagen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Leslie Crow, and I will start off by apologizing for my voice that is just coming back, so please bear with me through this, but I'm really excited to be with you here today. So I joined TripActions in January, and I've been leading the people team ever since. I came from MuleSoft beforehand, and before that was at Dropbox and Google. So really excited to spend some time today. I think the theme in my career has really been about scaling and hypergrowth, and so I think hopefully today's topics will be interesting for you. And over to Lorna, who actually has her voice in full text.
I do. So I will be your wingman. So I'll no worries.
Thank you.
You got it. Thank you all for having us. This is very exciting. My name's Lorna Hagen, and I am the Chief People Officer at Namely. And I hope you guys all know us, but Namely is an all-in-one HR tech solution for mid-sized companies. So HRIS, benefits enrollment, time and attendance, communications. I, similar to Leslie, have done the big and small. So the last 6 years, I've worked in mid-sized tech companies, but before that was at some fairly large companies in all sorts of industries, so media, sports management, and retail. So, this topic is near and dear to my heart because I've actually done the scaling at both big and small, and so really excited to chat with all of you about it.
I think an interesting thing here too, so TripActions and Namely, we're actually partners. And I think that while Lorna and I are on opposite coasts in New York and in San Francisco, I think we both share a similar passion for products that actually create a really great user experience based on our end. So we're Namely customers, and we chose Namely when we were scaling up and growing. We went from a really small company and needed to find a solution that would work for us as we were growing. And I think a lot of that was really tied to how do we create a really good experience for our employees and choose a system and a tool that it would actually be very easy for them to use.
I think that's really important to what Leslie just said. How we think about the user experience for our customers mirrors very much how we think about the user experience for our employees. And TripActions has really allowed us not only to provide, frankly, a beautiful interface to our travelers throughout the company, but also an incredibly easy, impactful, and strategic reporting functionality and financial tool to our finance team to really understand how we're spending money across the business and how we're utilizing travel as a business lever. So as we think about our topic today around building successful people teams and scaling incredible cultures, one of the first things that we wanted to talk to you all about was this idea of prioritizing employee engagement and satisfaction. And we all know about Zappos and happy employees, and we've probably either seen Tony Hsieh speak or read the book, and we've all seen the surveys and the articles out there that say people don't care about comp, they only care about a sense of purpose. Well, a little bit, and some of that is true all at the same time. But I think there are a few things here. I think it's really important for us to start understanding that engagement and culture are only two touch points in the employee experience. Employee experience is now becoming a very broad but important and specific mandate for HR departments and specifically chief people officers. And there are three, as I think about this and some of the research that I've read, three contextual influences that we really need to clearly understand. things that are squarely the responsibility, frankly, of leadership teams, not specifically HR. And those three things are strategy, culture, and values. And they're all different. And I find many companies just kind of meshing them together and talking about culture as one thing. And then there are, so underneath then that's kind of that umbrella of strategy and culture and values. And then you have these physical touch points, right? The actual things that impact an employee directly that really form a full picture of your company's employee experience. And those six things are, coworkers, obviously, like, are we hiring people that complement but also add, right? So people talk about, are they a fit? Well, really, you want to talk about culture add versus culture fit. So coworkers, customers, right? Am I working at a company that serves a customer that I am very interested in being a part of that ecosystem? And you see that now with so much stuff happening with gun violence or with marijuana. And so people need to make choices around the customers that they want to serve. So coworkers, leaders, your third, customers, your third is leaders, your physical workspace, obviously being the kind of the most blatant manifestation of physical touch points, systems and technology. And so we've all asked that question in our survey, do you have the tools to do your job? And then work processes. And that's so critical as you scale. As you scale, process is going to change, and it might become more complex, but if you're very smart and lucky, it actually becomes simpler. And so HR teams can directly and indirectly impact all of these. And so, what I would say is prioritize engagement through those lenses and really have a point of view on all of them instead of kind of getting lost in kind of the miasma of what everybody calls culture, when you can really parse that out and be very specific and intentful around what you want to do. Leslie?
Yeah, I really like how you broke that down. And I also think like this whole concept of culture feels super overwhelming. I think when you always turn to the HR person and be like, tell us like what you're doing around culture. And it's number one, it's never, like, culture is never led by HR. Like, our job is to bolster it. And I think that, that question still comes. And I think it feels very overwhelming and very big and very ambiguous and even challenging as you're thinking about growing globally and you're opening up offices around the world or even in other parts of the US. And it's a little bit more challenging to think about like, what is culture, right? Because you're always going to have nuances to how you think about it in different places. So I really like the emphasis on the experience, because in many ways that experience and then combining that with all the other things that you said really does answer that question and provide some ability to focus when you think about culture.
And I just, to add one last thing to that, I remember hearing the former CEO of Burberry speak about how they scaled Burberry, right? They kind of went through this huge growth, and then they didn't, and then Angela Ahrendts became CEO. And what she said when I heard her speak several years ago was, listen, the culture of all of our stores in all of our locations is local and different, and it's special to them. But the experiences that we want to provide for our staff are global. It means something to be part of the Burberry family, but it's going to look a little bit different whether you're in, Hong Kong or Hawaii or Paris. And so that kind of always stuck with me. And that was many, many years ago. And really it's, I think, becoming very heightened now in our conversations around employee experience.
No, I agree. And again, I think it's a great way to like make the topic less overwhelming, right? When you think about, okay, it's okay, and we should be supportive of having microcultures exist at a company. It's not like everything needs to be exactly the same around the globe. So I think that actually ties in really nicely to this, because the next thing we wanted to talk about is the consumerization of business. And I think I'm sure you've all faced this in one way, shape, or form. But the truth is, this whole idea when we're thinking about experience, part of the reason we're talking so much about experience is there really isn't as much of a disconnect between work and life anymore. People's lives and work start to blend together, and a lot of that is technology driven. But I think there's a lot of things that we can do as people leaders to make sure that we're actually embracing that trend. And that that does not mean that you have to be on work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. It's not about that. But I think there's a lot of things that we can do in terms of making choices for the tools that we use and how we approach work that actually supports this, right? So I think like one is offer products that are easy to use. But I think there's actually much more, Lorna and I feel this obviously in our businesses, but there's a lot more pressure on businesses to provide services that actually will create a great experience for the user. It's no longer okay to have a product that really optimizes for back-end function or not for the end user. And so by really focusing on that end user, and then for you as a people leader, thinking about how can I choose tools that my employees will actually want to use, and that actually would represent an experience that they would get if they were out in the world. We think about it from a transaction perspective. It's like, it shouldn't be any harder to travel for work than it should be for traveling personally. So I think that's the one thing. And then the second thing is really, people are on their phones all the time. Like everything is mobile first. If you're choosing tools that can only be used on like if you're sitting there at your laptop, it's going to be challenging. So think about it. Your employees are on the go all the time. They're commuting to and from work. They're traveling, whatever it is. How do you pick systems and tools that they can actually be very, very productive and have an optimized mobile experience so that while they're on the go, they can actually still be like get things done and be engaged with the rest of their team or the rest of the company. The last thing is really, you're talking about how as a people function, how do you do this properly? It really does start with how you hire for your own team. So when you think about building your own team, if you want to create this employee and a great experience for all of your employees, you have to hire people on your team who come in and say, hey, like I'm motivated because I want employees to have an amazing experience here. I want candidates to have an amazing experience with us. And so if you hire people with those motivations, they're going to be the ones coming to you with the creative ideas on how to actually create this employee experience that you want. Lorna, anything you wanted to add on that one?
Yeah, so the two really important things. Thank you for that. One is it is all of our responsibilities to be best friends with our IT departments, right? Because there is just this constant, right? There's this constant tension, and this idea of why can't my work be as easy as my life? Why can't I just bring my own device? Why can't I use the apps that I use that I want to? And depending on the industry that you're in, there are varying degrees of philosophical differences on security. And so really understanding where your IT department falls so that you can then support the decisions that get made and communicate effectively is critical, right? It's critical to your own credibility and to the experience that you're giving employees. So that's the first thing that I would say. I would say outside of work, to Leslie's point, employees are participating in a really immersive digital experience as part of everything that they do, right? They wake up to an alarm set on their smartphone. They pre-order coffee for pickup or for their commute to be faster. They step into a room that's programmed by their Nest so that the temperature is the way that they want it to be. And as they grow accustomed to an easier and less time-consuming life, more personalized experience outside of work, they start to seek that experience inside of work. And that's what this experience is all about, right? It becomes less about ping pong and more about quality. And so specifically, HR departments and heads of HR should focus on playing three very specific roles to help their companies really effectively drive this idea of a digital business transformation. I think, even if we're tech companies, I would say that we're all pretty analog in how we're thinking about employee experiences. And certainly that is the case when we think about our HR staff and the skill sets that they bring and who we're able to recruit for. So I'll leave you with kind of three profiles for you to think about as you're building your team. So this idea of really becoming a digital business expert and a key participant in conversations about your organization's digital business strategy. So it's not necessarily like what products should we sell or not sell, but what experience am I giving the customer and how do I get to mirror that? And the customer is asking for an easier digital experience. My employees should have the same. I'll give you two really great examples, hopefully for the women out there, of how this varies so differently. I don't know what happened to J. Crew, but all of a sudden their business has gone from like hero to zero, and exchanging things on J. You can't even do it anymore. They don't even let you exchange online for some reason. I bought a pair of shoes from a company I'd never heard of the other day. and the exchange experience took less than 60 seconds, and the shoes were at my house in 2 days, and it was incredible. Like, we should be talking, those people should be talking, their HR department, right, should be talking to them saying, how do you do that, and how do we mirror that for our employees? So that's one. Ensuring that your current and your future workforce can support your company's digital business goals becomes, by having your team become talent architects. Do they speak the language? Do they know the skill sets of the future? Do they know the gaps that exist between what you have today and what you need tomorrow? That becomes really, really critical. So this idea of talent architects, right? Getting outside of, it's a mix between your recruiter and your L&D function, essentially. So how do you find and design those jobs? And then how do you digitalize HR to deliver a more responsive and functional support mechanism to the business and really become a functional innovator? So it's not just, say, taking Namely or Trip Actions, but taking those two tools and saying, this is how we can really optimize for that. This is what our employees want, and really becoming an innovator, to Leslie's earlier point about creative thinking around your tools.
And I think that ability to be an innovator actually provides a competitive advantages for you as a company, right? And we'll talk about this a little bit later when we think about retaining and attracting talent, but I think all the things that you outlined, Lorna, really set up. If you can do those things, you create an experience that's different for employees, and it actually becomes an advantage for you when you're thinking about recruiting and retaining people.
Agreed. And then that gets us to recruiting, right? And so how do you scale and then scale culture in growth mode? And, we have these excellent points around that, right? How do you simplify onboarding, which is critical? I was just talking to a friend of mine who got hired as a CFO at a company, and he said there was no onboarding. I had to call the CEO the day before I started to say, where do I go and who's my assistant, right? How do you simplify onboarding? How do you align your company policies to your values? And that really means, like, I'm walking the walk. Very similar to our illustration. How do you leverage managers as you grow, which is, frankly, out of all of these, one of the most important things you could spend time and money on. Accounting for distributed teams. There's a great article in the New York Times this week about how we should stop calling it remote, because that's really just the way that the world is today. And that designation of remote makes people feel less engaged. And then how do you build these feedback loops? So what I really want to double down on is culture and core values, sorry. So to me, it's really critical to understand that values are not static, right? I've spoken to enough CEOs who say, hey, our values should never change, to make me scratch my head. And I always think that's so odd, because, a company that's 50 people, frankly, should probably have very different values than a company that's 5,000 people, right? There's a fantastic book, if you've never read it, it's titled What Got You Here Won't Get You There by Marshall Goldsmith. I love it. Everyone should read that book. As companies grow, skills and behaviors need to evolve and generally become more sophisticated. And a perfect example of this, frankly, is Facebook. There is a reason that Facebook edited their go fast and break shit value. And it wasn't a value that was going to help them scale culture or business in a responsible manner. And look at what's happened, right? Flat out, that is the best example of a value that should have evolved long before it ever did. Additionally, I think your values should be verbs, right? So there is something to action, a call to action for employees to know how to do what's really important for growth in a way that is important and differentiated to you, right? So what's important to me at Namely is going to be different than what's important to Leslie at Trip Actions and to all of you on the phone. So how do you think about those actions that you want employees to take that aren't price of entry values like trust and collaboration, and really differentiate yourself and then evolve those as your company starts to grow? So some of the things that I've experienced in the last 7 years in high growth companies that I hope is valuable to you guys. Leslie, what do you think?
No, I totally agree with you. I think it's really easy to fall into this trap where you think that you write your values on a slide somewhere or on the wall somewhere, and then you think that they need to exist that way for the rest of time. And not that you should be changing your values every month and reevaluating, adding new ones and changing them, but I do think it's great for you, like what you were saying, to like say it's okay. You have license to think about it. Like the company changes. It is not when you're a 100-person company in one office to a 1,000-person company in 10 offices. Like your company has evolved, and being okay with the fact that your culture and your values and other things can evolve over time. So I really like that. And I just want to underscore one more thing that you said around managers. I think this is one I feel particularly passionate about, because if you're growing really fast, at the beginning, a lot of the connection to the company people can feel because they are maybe sitting all in the same room and they see the founders every day or whatever it is. You have, a team meeting every day, or every week you have an all hands where everyone can see each other. It's a lot harder as you grow to be able to have that connection always be through, your founders, for instance, or your CEO. And it's a lot of pressure to put on that one person who at some point is not going to know everyone. And I think when you think about culture scaling, your managers have so much power. They're the ones who every day are making decisions on who's getting into the company, who are they hiring, what kind of culture are they building on their team as they're growing. And so the more expectation setting you can do there, and that will mean something different everywhere. I think of manager development in like two different buckets. Is you have the basics, especially if you have newer managers, you want to make sure that they can get trained on, how to have one-on-ones and how to deliver feedback. But then there's this whole other side, which is setting the expectations for what a great manager looks like at your company. And that is something that no, you can't buy content. You can't ask a vendor to do that. That is something that only by being in your environment. But there's so much value that comes from actually telling managers and letting them know what the expectations are, and also giving them the license to build their team and their culture in a way that aligns with the overarching company culture and values. So I think that one, when we think about growing really fast, I just wanted to underscore that one, because as you grow, your managers become your levers for employee engagement.
So I love that you said that, Leslie, and I think very rarely do we ever talk about where we failed. So I'll give you one of those embarrassing but golden nuggets, which is at one of my organizations, I decided to partner with a training company that I had worked for before very successfully, and thought, okay, I can piece together from their content a curriculum for manager development, and it just failed. It fell flat. People didn't like it. It was not adopted. It wasn't sticky, like they say in the L&D world. And what I realized very quickly is it wasn't ours. It wasn't, managing at our company. And so we put money and people behind building something that was bespoke to us. And the 180 in adoption and NPS from the store bought to the homemade was unbelievable. And when we came to Namely, that was the first thing that we did, to really interview our leaders and our managers, say, what does it mean to be a manager and a leader at Namely? And let's actually, pay that forward by building content that's very special and specific to us. So I think that's critical.
Yeah, I love that. So I'll take it through. To be very honest, this is one of my favorite topics. I have a very soft spot in my heart for all things hiring, mostly because I know and have experienced firsthand the challenges of hiring and retaining great talent as you're going through growth mode. And the truth is, no matter where you are, it's competitive. There are a lot of people. You probably have candidates who have a ton of offers. There are a lot of, especially when we think about the coast, where Lorna and I are recruiting, there are a lot of bright, shiny objects out there, and it can be really challenging. But the truth is, no matter where you're recruiting, you're probably competing for talent in one way, shape, or form. So I think my first piece of advice on this one is, first of all, ask yourself if you're recruiting in the right places. I think it's very easy to go to the usual suspects. And when you think about scaling, just doubling down in the places that you are. But Lorna mentioned this earlier, this whole concept of remote is going away. We have workforces are distributed. So ask yourself the question, if you're in, the Bay Area and New York, do those need to be the only places that you are? Can you be other places? Especially because a lot of talent pools are moving outside of those areas now. So we take that piece off of the table and know that that question. Hopefully you've been able to answer that question at some point. But there's two pieces, right? There's the hiring piece and the retaining piece. And on the hiring front, I think especially in growth mode, it really does come down to providing a great experience to your candidates. Markets are small, and the majority of people who will end up chatting with you will not get jobs. They will, depending on what your conversion rates are, but let's be honest, it's not going to be more than 50% of people that talk to you will end up getting jobs. So the most important thing is that those people walk away and say, I had an amazing experience interviewing with TripActions or Namely or whatever it is, and feel really confident recommending one of their friends. And we've gotten some of our best referrals from candidates who come through and actually didn't get the job at the end for whatever reason, but had such a great experience and loved the team, loved the managers, where they said, actually, I have a friend who does this. Maybe they'd be interested in TripActions too. So there's so much value in providing that great experience. And these markets are small. So if you're in growth mode and running so fast and forget about the experience and you're not responding to candidates, or they're like not having a great time when they come on site, there's so much damage that can be done to your recruiting brand just from an experience perspective. So I think that's a really important one. And then the second thing, in order to have that experience, is really making sure that you hire recruiters who care about that. I think it's really easy, especially if you're growing, you maybe just desperately need recruiters, and you find there's also competitive to find great recruiters out there. But if you find people who aren't really motivated by building teams and providing great experiences, and instead recruiters who are motivated by, hey, I just want to check the box and move, get this rec filled, you're just not going to be able to maintain that brand out there that you'll need in the market. So hiring, super, super critical, obviously, if you're growing fast. But at the same time, retaining is equally important in the sense of if you keep your eye off the ball on retaining talent, you're going to end up in a spot where you've hired a lot of people, but the people who've been here for a while aren't necessarily feeling engaged or staying. And I think the thing here is that kind of look at the two different angles. One is focus on learning. I think that it's so easy, especially in our field, to feel the pressure to, hey, my answer to this is I need to provide really structured career development processes and programs and trainings and all of those things. And not that any of those things are bad or may not be part of the answer, but if you create a culture where employees are really focused on learning and what they're actually experiencing and how they're growing in their job, then those things are a benefit potentially, but not a requirement. You don't need a checklist to know to get from point A to point B. One of the things we think about here at TripActions is how do we create this culture of learning? One of the things we do is we have this debriefing model where we think about, okay, how are we constantly reflecting and learning on the things that happen and encouraging employees to make mistakes. One of our values is all about challenging the status quo. But the flip side to that is if you challenge the status quo and you totally fail, or you raise the bar and you totally fail, it's okay, let's move on. But we know that's how great ideas come out. So a lot of this is, we talk about culture, experience. A lot of this is if you can create a culture of learning, then a lot of those structured programs can become a nice perk or benefit or a side note. But your employees are really getting value out of their experience because they're learning. And on the topic of learning, I think the other component that's a little bit more tactical is really focusing on internal development and internal mobility. You have amazing talent at your company, and as you're growing, think about how you can leverage that talent to maybe open up a new office or start a new team or seed culture in a new place that you're trying to grow. So and that's for you as a leader is a benefit to you because you obviously know that you have great talent, that you're able to make sure that you're growing the company properly. But at the same time, that's a development opportunity for whoever the person is who gets to go do those things. So I think even just focusing on, how are you encouraging your internal mobility? How are you leveraging your talent? Whether it's, formal internal job boards or processes or anything like that, but more so, again, creating a culture where you encourage people to move around the organization and it's supported that, we had someone who joined TripActions and went from, the support team to IT and is now on people. And that's, it's one of those things that's really cool. And not only is development for that person, but it's a really great way to make sure that all the IP that's stored in people's brains ends up getting leveraged around the globe as you're growing. Lorna, anything you wanted to add on that one?
Yeah, I think you spent a lot of time on recruiting, which I love because that's not where I spend my time. I spend most of my time on the retention piece of it, and I think you guys know by now that I love a good framework. And as I've been thinking about what's happened, and I'm a little bit older than Leslie, guys, so to kind of to see the difference between 23 years ago and today, I see these key shifts in the expectations of employees and candidates that our team should really be aware of. And the first one is this notion of aligning people and purpose, right? So and this will really summarize everything we've been talking about today, but how to build an end-to-end employee experience that views employees as internal customers and really delivers some incredible value through personalization, right? So whether it's your tools, whether it's your process, whether it's your people, really thinking about that. Act with purpose first and foremost in your internal and external decision making, and really hold your leaders accountable for adhering to your company's purpose and values. And I think a couple very specific things that you can do, like you should constantly be surveying your candidates and your onboarding experience. Are we doing the right thing? Are we telling them something accurate? And then are we helping them experience that accuracy when they come on board? And then tying your leaders' compensation to your values and your behaviors. Very few companies do that. And very few people get fired for performance. They get fired because they just don't know how to work within the ecosystem. So how do you think about really holding accountability and tied to the wallet? So the second one, so that's aligning people and purpose. The second one is building careers, to Leslie's point. Nurturing external relationships with candidates. So how do you really think about CRMs as opposed to just applicant tracking systems? How do you and university relations and your alumni? I mean, there is so much goodness out there if you really nurture it. Emphasize the entire employee life cycle, so cradle to grave, and create future-focused analytical rigor. So where did my people go? Where are they? When should I be reaching out to them? So how do you really keep a robust network of your alumni? And then really promoting career partnerships internally and externally that manage for the risk in gaps in your skill sets, but also in career derailment, right? We've all seen this. You have a superstar that all of a sudden, oh my God, they can't succeed in this job, and shoot, I have to manage them out. So I would challenge everybody to really think of career ladders that are tied to skills development as opposed to promotion attainment, and tie your compensation to building a more robust skill set as an employee that's going to ultimately help your company and their careers. And that really helps to prevent that derailment. So aligning people and purpose is the first. Shift in expectations, building careers as a second thing. And then the third and last is this idea of co-creating change. So are we investing in systems and programs that support employees as agents of change within your organization and really help make talent decisions to move at the speed of business? So sometimes what we find is, and I just had this conversation today, oh, well, engineer X doesn't know how to code in this. He's okay, but he's not awesome. So let's manage him out. Well, I don't know that that's the conversation we should be having, right? So it's really hard to find engineer X. So why don't we build that skill set? And instead of posting jobs, also think about posting projects. So to Leslie's earlier point, like this idea of internal mobility, I might not have all the skill sets to do this job, but I can certainly dig into a project. And so how do we make that system more robust for our employees and really kind of hold our recruiters and our HR business partners more accountable for being the champions of talent throughout their client groups? And then ultimately, how do you hold leaders accountable for including all employees in decision making and elevating employee leadership by promoting ideas based on merit? So we see people get stuck with titles all the time. I can't say something because I don't have title X, or I don't want to say something because I don't have title X, or I'm not going to listen to someone because they don't have title X. And so how do you kind of break that cycle of hierarchy and really, really think about retention through the lens of creativity and open communication and collaboration. So those are kind of shifts that I'm seeing that frankly didn't exist when I started in the workforce, and were just starting to bubble up probably 10 years ago. And so I would leave you with that in thinking about how you're retaining your talent.
I really like that, especially your point about, shifting away from this whole, like we always talk about promotions as being like the be all, and people feel like that's the be all end all of development, but shifting that dialogue to being more about the skills and how you're growing. I really like that. And I honestly think that's like probably the best career advice you could give anyone, right? It's like, if you like stop anchoring on the title and all of those things, and everything else kind of just comes if you're learning and growing and developing that skill toolkit you're talking about. Great. So I will wrap this up and then we can get to Q&A. So just to kind of take all the things that Lorna and I talked about and package them in a way that hopefully can give you guys a few things to walk away with. So you can hear the thread across all the things we discussed is really about prioritizing that employee experience. And then you take that and then align your policies with your values. Lorna spent a bunch of time on this at the beginning. Is, values, again, aren't just something it shouldn't be something that's on a slide or on a wall. And how do you bring them to life with the policies that you're developing? You heard us just talk about investing in managers as your levers to be able to scale your culture properly. And then, in tying back to that experience is how do you think about the technology that you're bringing in as a people leader and using that technology to really bolster that experience and give that, that personalized consumer experience that your employees are needing. And then obviously for any of you that are growing at companies that are growing really fast, making sure that you're differentiating yourself through your candidate experience and providing the best possible experience so that the word of mouth on the street about your company and the kind of work people and the environment that you provide is really, really strong.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Leslie and Lorna. That was really great content. Now we'll go ahead and take some questions. And just a reminder to anyone who's on the line right now that you can type your questions into the box in your control panel, and then we'll either get to them now or we'll respond to you later if you email us at webinars@TripAction. So the first one is, beyond management, how should you leverage and or train your executive team to ensure culture successfully scales with the business?
I think the good thing about this one is Lorna and I will probably have very different answers. So I'll tackle it first, and then I think it'll be really good to see both perspectives. So I think taking the hiring lens that I was mentioning earlier, I think if you're scaling and growing, a big piece is number one, obviously setting the tone with that group on like what's expected and what culture means. But most importantly, ensuring that your executive team knows what makes someone successful at the company and how you expect them to drive their teams to hire people that actually not only fit in, but again, bolster that culture. And if you're growing really fast, the DNA of your company will change, month over month, or every 6 months, it'll feel different, right? If you're adding a lot of new employees, so you really have to start at the beginning. And if your executive team, your leadership team is responsible for building culture on their teams, which obviously they are, a big part is making sure that you're starting off in the right place with the right people. And again, it comes down to defining like what makes someone successful at your company. Like obviously you can have values, but it actually takes a fair amount of work. And we actually did this exercise as an executive team about 6 months ago, and actually like dissecting what the DNA of a great trip actioner is, and making sure that we could articulate outside of our values or someone that would align with the values, what are the behaviors or attributes of someone that actually would make them successful at trip actions. And I think if you do that exercise, it allows your leaders to know what like the North Star is, and at the end be able to hold their teams accountable for hiring people who really meet that bar. So Lorna, over to you if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, I don't know. We don't differ, but I will say what I would add on, kind of the next step of that is, I've never met a CEO who said, oh my God, we didn't hit our hiring targets and HR is responsible, right? They either say nothing, or in the best case scenarios, and this is what I've experienced in my last 2 companies, they really put a huge amount of responsibility on their direct reports and the leadership of the organization to drive recruitment, to ensure retention, and to maintain or build culture. And I think that's probably one of the most critical things. And so what we've been able to do, and when I say we, a few folks that work for me that have worked with me before, is to really influence and help build executive scorecards that CEOs get monthly that show here are the business results that were tied to executive wise quarter, and here are the people metrics that we are following and measuring to make sure that our company is strong and in a good position for growth. And, those metrics will change depending on where you are in your business cycle. But I think that level of accountability, it is essentially giving them a report card every quarter is very, very important. And you can't hide from it, right? You can't say, oh, well, I wasn't sure. Oh, recruiting didn't talk to me. Oh, really? Like, my team isn't giving feedback. They're not filling out their scorecards. I just didn't know that stuff. And so, holding them accountable in a very real, tangible way where your business partners know the scorecards, where your recruiters, are giving you the information, and where your CEO sees it actively and works on it with their team. I think that's probably one of the best things you can do.
Great. The next question we have, what are some specific ways you've seen companies differentiate their candidate experience?
On this one, I think it's Lorna, did you want to go first?
Yeah, I was going to give one really quick example of, I was speaking with a friend about what we've seen, and they gave me this fantastic example of a company that they'd worked for where engagement it was in a manufacturing plant, and engagement was really going down, and voluntary turnover was something like 80%, and it was low skilled workers, and so they didn't know what to do. And what they started to do was personalize the onboarding. So they started actually recruiting fewer people, spending more time on the onboarding. And instead of giving them a generic T-shirt with the name of the company, they started to do fleeces with the name of the company, but also the name of the employee, which is a little bit of a risk because if they have such high turnover, it might turn out to be kind of costly. But what they saw was the opposite. What they saw was employees saying, oh my God, you care enough to know my name, to let everybody else know what it is, to give me an experience that's mine, that's not generic. And what they saw was an almost a 180 change in that. They saw higher engagement, they saw lower attrition, they saw higher productivity. And so it's just one small example of how the things that you think of the least can make such a huge difference, right? So they probably thought, oh, we need to do a much better job in training, and let's bring in a company and pay $100,000 to do better training. And it wasn't that at all. It was like, just give me a human experience and let's see what happens. And so that's one way that I've seen it happen.
Yeah, I think your point on personalization is so true, and I've seen the same thing. I think great candidate experiences come from the little personal touches. One thing that we did in my last company is there was a note that I had written to that we would give to every candidate that came on site to give them advice, and it was signed by me and said, hey, welcome, we're so excited to have you here. Here's some advice on how to make the most of your day here. Little things like that, or if you have a candidate traveling in, a note in their hotel room, calling the hotel to have put a note in the room or deliver something, a note of encouragement before they come on site, or even you have a candidate late in process about to get an offer, having the interview team sign a card and send to them. Those little things really matter.
Those things really matter, and I would say to you, if you work at a company where there's a product that can be relevant. I used to work at a publishing company many years ago, and one of the questions that I would ask the candidates was, what are you reading? What are you reading for fun? And then what are you reading to stay current in your job? And if we hired them, I would go back to that answer, see what they were reading for fun, and then find whatever book our publishing house published and send them a few of those books, because they're like, oh my God, they love mysteries, or they love romance, or they have kids, so let's send them picture books. And it made an incredible difference. And they started day one thinking, holy cow, I made the right choice. Those people care.
Absolutely, I love that.
Okay, and we've got time for one more question. How do you suggest gathering feedback from your employees in a way that they'll feel comfortable giving it?
So from my side, I think it really starts with number one, don't ask for feedback if you're not going to do something with it. So I think part of making people feel comfortable is knowing that if they actually go out of their way to share it, that you will do something with it. So if you do ask for feedback, that follow through in communication, that something has been done with, whether it's a survey or whatever it is that you, however you gathered feedback, that you're actually actioning whatever was given to you. And I think the second thing also is like offer a lot of options. So people feel more, we talk about this all the time, at Trip Actions, we have this culture of like giving direct and thoughtful feedback. But some people feel more comfortable giving it in different ways. Some people prefer to write it down. Some people prefer to say it or to stop by an office hour or to like give it one-on-one. There's a lot of different ways that people feel comfortable giving feedback. So I think the more options that you give people to engage and give feedback, the better, because you're more likely to reach a much wider audience.
That's a beautiful point, and I think it shouldn't be minimized. I had worked at a place once where the kind of conventional wisdom was, no, everybody's going to ask questions at our all hands, and that actually wasn't the case. And once you opened it up with a very simple anonymous tool, once you opened up, just questions at company.com, once, we saw such a greater intake of what people wanted to know and ask us. And for us, it was great because then we started to see patterns and we started to see similarities. And then we could address those at the all hands saying, hey, we got this from, info@company.com. We got this from Anonymous. We got this straight to Ask CEO. And collectively, you guys have a similar things that you want to know. So here, it's going to be a topic at our next all hands. And so I think that's a great way of thinking about it. And choices are really excellent because we're all different and we like to speak differently. And so how do you pull in the introverts and your extroverts at your company through the different tools that you use?
Yep. Okay, great. That's leaves us with that time. So thank you so much for hosting, Leslie and Lorna. And thank you everyone for joining us for today's webinar. We really appreciate you all joining us today. And we will see you next time. Thank you.